I am by no stretch of the imagination a programmer, developer, or a computer science major. I am simply a consumer who's voicing out his observations on trends that may or may not be in the best interest of consumers. This video was made with the support of my patrons and subscribers. Consider giving this video a like and subscribe to my channel. More info in the description and comments below. With the release of Monster Hunter Wilds and all of its Vaseline-smeared TAA glory, comes a few new forms of bullshit that I have to contend with when looking for whether or not I can run a game. And before we even begin, yes, that is something that I actually worry about now, even though my graphics card is just 2 generations old. And if you need specifics regarding my PC specs, it will be down in the description. But anyway, what exactly am I talking about here? It's not the fact that some games are now forcing temporal anti-aliasing down the throats of would-be players. It's also not the fact that some games nowadays have a hard time running above 60 frames per second despite running on new and top-of-the-line hardware, while at the same time looking almost the same, if not worse, than games before it. And it's definitely not the fact that I've seen more and more games use upscaling and frame generation as a sort of crutch to push higher frames. And before anyone says anything about the past generations having their own games that were unoptimized, I recognize those, and I still vaguely remember how Fallout 3 used to run poorly and how Stalker used to run like ass without proper modding. I could still remember what Yahtzee Croshaw said about Stalker Clear Sky.
You couldn't get away with releasing a buggy game in the cartridge and cassette days, you'd get sentenced to trampling under the company Brontosaurus.
But what's happening right now is a new level of low and is something worth talking about and also needs to be shined a light on. With that, we can start with... Anti-aliasing is a technique used to smoothen those jagged edges, since every single pixel you see is a square, and we all know what it's like trying to create a diagonal line in MS Paint with the use of squares. Now, there are a couple of options on how to smooth those jagged edges out, and here's a couple of them for context. Fast approximate anti-aliasing is essentially the quick and dirty solution to smoothing out edges. It doesn't cost a lot of computing power, but it essentially blurs those edges out. On one hand, you don't get to see the horrible jagged edges, and on the other hand, your edges look like someone smeared mayonnaise on it. SSAA, or super sampling, gives you the best possible look, mostly because it renders the image you're seeing at a higher resolution, then scales it down to your resolution, making the image look extremely crisp, with the catch that it makes your computer burn to a crisp. MSAA, or multi-sampling, is basically the diet version of super sampling. It only detects the jagged edges that need the anti-aliasing beam and smooths it out without managing to turn your computer into a space heater. SMAA, or subpixel morphological anti-aliasing, combines the quickness of FXAA and MLAA edge detection to get the best of both worlds. And we finally get to the weird uncle of the anti-aliasing family that your parents never leave you in the same room with alone. TAA, or temporal anti-aliasing, also known as TXAA, also known as TMAA, or TSSAA, is another anti-aliasing technique that combines the information of the past frames and the current frames to remove jagged edges in the current frame. While this process might be all well and good, it has the extreme likelihood of producing a ghosting effect, which now plagues a lot of games. A short list of games that have forced TAA would be Cyberpunk 2077, Battlefield 2042, Diablo 4, Dirt 5, and a recent example being Monster Hunter Wilds. The smeariness of that game was so bad that someone decided to create a mod that disables all post-processing effects in the game, which included TAA. Unfortunately, not every game has that same level of mod support and following that other games have, so you're pretty much just gonna have to deal with this level of smear on other games as well, since games nowadays have this hard-on for shoving TAA down our throats like it's the best anti-aliasing solution known to man. It's gotten so bad that there's even a dedicated subreddit for it called r/fuckTAA. As far as my research goes, Monster Hunter Wilds is currently the only game that literally asks you to use upscaling and frame generation to reach a certain number of frames. It also doesn't help that the game literally asks you to turn it on when you start it up just in case you forget. While this might feel like a one-off, where it becomes just a one-time thing, and this may be my inner negativity talking, but I'm not gonna be surprised if 2 or 3 years from now, upscaling and frame generation becomes mandatory even at 1440p and 1080p. And I'm also aware that this could also be chalked up to the issues regarding the RE engine, as evidenced by its piss-poor performance running Dragon's Dogma 2, especially when inside cities with lots of NPCs. While Monster Hunter Wilds quite literally listed upscaling and frame generation as a system requirement, other games might as well plaster it on the cover art of the game for how badly they would run without upscaling and frame generation. I don't know what space age magic is happening here, but I'm gonna give you something to look at. This is Night City of Cyberpunk 2077. There's a lot happening, right? And at the same time, the world is very dynamic. Now check this one out. This is literally a forest, a stroll through the woods. What in God's name are these FPS numbers? It literally does not make sense to me that this uncomplicated gallivanting around the park is tanking this 4090's performance, a graphics card that was just released back in 2022. Even Silent Hill 2 has problems, which is hilarious because in Silent Hill, the one that was released in 1999, the whole reason why there was a fog in the first place was twofold. It was used to give off the atmospheric horror vibe, but it was also used to mask the PS1's hardware limitations. Out of all the games I'd expect to have this sort of problem, the last game I would expect it from is a game that literally has a fog that limits your supposed vision. Or in this case, it should also limit the draw distance since you can't see past the fucking fog. I honestly have no idea what's happening behind the scenes out there. What are we even making games out of these days? Is there some sort of futuristic space age magical bullshit PC that these developers use to run these games during development and testing? I'd like to preface what I'm about to say with, I'm the type of person who loves gaming at a stable 60 plus frames per second. Anything above it, I'm good. I'd actually be fine maxing out graphics to the nth degree as long as it doesn't dumpster the absolute living crap out of the performance. Unfortunately, that's the case with ray tracing. You get curious and decide that you want to try it out and see what all the noise is about, and yes, it does look pretty good, but after seeing that 9 times out of 10 you're more preoccupied about the game part of playing a game and not the mildly realistic reflections and lighting on the environments, you then start to realize that you're more or less just playing the game at that point instead of admiring the real-time lights and reflections. Not to mention, it absolutely tanks performance, which then makes you turn on upscaling and frame generation just to keep up. And while this technology is a nice addition to making games look better, it's not always consistent across the board. Some games implement ray tracing better than other games that it gets to a point that sometimes you won't even notice whether or not ray tracing was on in the first place, aside from the obvious tanking of performance, of course. It's nice that developers push the envelope every once in a while. I mean, we wouldn't even have the "Can it run Crisis" jokes if it weren't for Crytek pushing the boundaries of what graphics could look like circa 2007. But at the same time, I don't want developers to be chasing the idea that being photoreal makes for the best viewing and gaming experience. A stylistic and distinct look also makes for a memorable game that can stand the test of time, and with higher and higher hardware demand, this also means less choices for those of us who just want to play games. While I do admit that my understanding and perspective is not coming from the eyes of a developer or a publisher, it is coming from someone on the receiving end of their decisions. And honestly, it feels bad to be running a game that looks like it was from a previous generation and see that your PC is barely scratching 60 plus frames per second. How about you? What concerns about the gaming industry you want me to talk about next? Drop your thoughts in the comments down below. And as always, thank you very much for watching. Consider joining my Patreon for more behind the scenes content, as well as my Discord community. And subscribe so you can get 500 FPS on every game you play. Until next time.